This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Overshadowed by World War II and the memory of the greatest generation, memories of Vietnam remained shrouded in confusion and controversy. Cloaked in the Cold War-era rhetoric of the domino theory, politicians demanded action in Indochina after the French were humiliated at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. The French, who had been in Vietnam since the 1870s, divided the country into three distinct regions in order to divide and conquer. Vietnamese nationals began fighting a guerrilla war that defined the conflict before U.S. intervention. President Dwight D. Eisenhower acted cautiously and only committed a small force of military advisors to help train the South Vietnamese Army, known as the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or ARVN. Neither Eisenhower or his successors, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Richard M. Nixon, asked Congress for a war declaration, and the conflict in Vietnam that cost 58,220 American lives was deemed to be a police action rather than a war. That distinction was lost on the men and women who put their lives on the line in a foreign country on the other side of the world. To them, it was war, plain and simple.
So the thing was that Vietnam was started because we needed to stop communism, we thought, and that would work. And the phrase at the time was the domino theory, that if Vietnam fell, then Cambodia would fall, Laos would fall, Thailand would fall, and so on, and it would just keep going. Well, it turned out to be half right. When we bailed out of Vietnam, in fact, Vietnam became and is now communist. Cambodia fell to the communists and had a horrible, horrible several decades. Laos fell to the communists. I think the only thing that's changing all of that is those people have gotten to be more capitalistic than communism. But the point is, they were right. Those things did fall. But we were being run by LBJ, who gave us as a Secretary of Defense a really bright executive from Ford Motor Company who also knew nothing at all about the war or how to fight it. So we were fighting a war that we probably shouldn't have been in. We were doing a halfway effort. We were losing people and spending a lot of money and gaining nothing.
We were stopping communism from taking over a small country.
Well, a facetious answer was, to the regular Army, this isn't much of a war, but it's the only war we got right now. You know, I don't know there was ever a reason. I'm fighting communism.
You could go through villages where everybody was smiling until you left the village, then you'd take fire from the rear. And you began to wonder, you know, we're fighting an extremely dedicated enemy. That was pretty obvious. And you wonder where this thing's going, what's going to happen. You don't have the perspective, since it was early in the war, of coming home and looking back at it and understanding what was going on.
And I felt like I was doing what you ought to do. There was a debate then on us. Should you go to the war, not go to a war? Should you, but if you don't follow in the laws of the land, maybe you are creating anarchy, which was always on my mind from the experiences my grandfather had had.
During the early days of American intervention, a cryptologist, Specialist 4th Class James T. Tom Davis of Overton County, Tennessee, was one of the first soldiers killed in combat. While returning from a radio reconnaissance mission near Kaohsiung, his Jeep struck a mine placed by guerrilla fighters, who then ambushed and killed Davis on December 22, 1961.
I've never felt entirely back in the world. It's been over 50 years since I boarded that big bird and flew away from the war. But I don't think I really got away. I remember the faces of the soldiers, the sounds, the smells, the heat and the filth. I remember the sound of desperate radio chatter and the whopping of helicopters. These memories just occur unbidden, without prompts. I don't think anyone but another infantryman can understand that. You are never completely back in the world.
Well, for one thing, the weather was very different. You had 2 seasons, hot and wet and hot and dry. And none of those were comfortable weather conditions. But I think probably the thing that struck me most was how primitive the locals lived.
Sometime around Christmas 1966, I got that letter from the president. I didn't know he knew where I lived, but he found me.
It was like a huge camp of all sorts of branches of the service there. And I do recall the old, I think, French architecture buildings. And I remember the trash heaps and little kids pouring over them.
I didn't have many dreams in Vietnam because I didn't get any REM sleep. I mean, most of the sleep we got was so fragmented because you were just on the alert for any kind of noise that wasn't normal. And so you missed that where you just totally relax. Like I said, I didn't have a full night's sleep and didn't have a solid bowel movement the whole year I was in Vietnam.
And I remember the plane being just really hot. And but when we landed, it was dark because the sun hadn't broken the horizon yet. And when we hit the landing field, they were being rocketed. And we flew in on a TWA because they dumped everybody's duffel bag out on the airstrip there. And then I remember some sergeant hollering, "Grab your duffel bag." And every duffel bag is in the dark is green with black lettering on it. And I think when I got to the bunker, I had somebody's last name I couldn't even pronounce. So that was my first day in country.
The first serious test of battle for the American military took place at La Drang, 4 bloody days of terror, from November 14th through 18th, 1965.
We were in a place called Happy Valley, and that's where the mosquitoes were so vicious and they all carried malaria. We took a lot of casualties from malaria at first. Then we went to the Idrang Valley and the world changed, and it was never the same after that. Yeah, the prisoner told us that there was several regiments up there, probably 2,000 soldiers, and their intent was to kill Americans. At the same time, this platoon that ran after this guy was suddenly surrounded and started getting shot. They had to dig in and form a perimeter. They didn't get away for 24 hours. They were cut off. There were 2 major attempts to get them out. The platoon leader was killed, the platoon sergeant was killed. A squad leader named Ernie Savage finally held them together through that whole night. He's a friend of mine, he'd been here, and he did one hell of a job. But no one could get to them. So Ernie was calling artillery all around him that night, and they put up a pretty good fight. But in the meantime, the enemy came down out of the hills, and the first day their attacks were disjointed. They didn't focus on one area, and that probably cost them the day. 2 things I remember about that. The first thing is that the helicopter crew said, when we get down, get off and run for the tree line. Don't look for your friends. And secondly, we flew over an area where I saw bundles wrapped in ponchos blowing in the prop wash. And they were dead soldiers. And I'd never seen that many dead soldiers lined up before. And that stays with me every single day. We lost 79 men in that engagement, killed, and about 120 were wounded out of 450. So I got off the helicopter and ran towards the tree line. And there were men there I didn't know. They weren't in my unit. And one of them gave another a $5 bill as I was sliding in. And I said, "What's all that about?" He said, "I bet him $5 you wouldn't make it." It's like that. And it was hell on earth there for a while.
1965 proved to be the first major turning point in the war. President Johnson's advisors told him that 2 American ships, the Maddox and the Turner Joy, had been attacked near Haiphong Harbor, and that the Vietnamese military and guerrilla fighters were gaining the upper hand. The U.S. had to increase its commitment. Johnson asked the Congress for permission to broaden America's commitment, and they gave Johnson a blank check with the War Powers Act, which not only increased spending on the war, but instituted the first draft since World War II. College enrollment shot up after Congress initiated the draft because it offered a way to get a deferment from military service. In Tennessee, male college students were required not only to maintain a GPA of 3.0 or higher, but to be enrolled in their local ROTC programs. At Tennessee Tech, students in uniform were ubiquitous, but one professor, Dr. Floyd Stewart, was notorious for his morbid sense of humor. At the end of each quarter, he placed the names and grades of students who passed his class on a board beside his office. For those who failed, he put their names on a map of Vietnam affixed to the door. 1968 proved to be another major turning point of the war. Up until that time, January and February provided a break in the fighting. Tet, the Chinese New Year, usually acted as a time of celebration. The North Vietnamese caught American forces off guard on January 31st, when General Vo Nguyen Giap ordered over 70,000 North Vietnamese troops and guerrillas to attack nearly 100 American positions in the south, including Saigon, An Loc, Hue, Pleiku, Da Nang, Quantum, Quang Tri, Bien Hoa, and Khe Sanh.
When Tet first broke out, I was running an ambush down around the Song Bay City. I was with the recon unit of the 101st A Troop 17th Cav. And we had killed a number of officers. It's been well documented throughout history. And we just see the big buildup down on the Cambodian Laotian border. So the units that I was with, nobody knew what Tet was going to be. We thought there was going to be some peace and a little bit of a treaty period during that period of time. But some of the information that we had taken off these NVA officers were real valuable in the fact that there was some major buildup taking place. So when Tet first broke out, that's where I was in Song Bay City, defending, along with a Green Beret unit there, defending a small compound there outside the city.
We were there. We'd been there just about 2 months before Tet. And of course, Tet hit the major cities, Saigon, Bien Hoa. They did not hit our base by any ground forces. They did mortar us and rocket us frequently for that whole month of February.
It wasn't supposed to happen, and we had no idea that this was going to occur. And that particular day, I had the class 5 is ammunition, and we had a very large ammunition supply point in Long Binh. And I had a large convoy that morning, probably 250 trucks, I can't remember exactly, but it was a large one. And I was there about 3:30 in the morning, and I had to sign what's called Transportation Control and Movement Documents. In other words, releasing all of the cargo to me, then I became responsible. So I'm signing all these papers. And a sergeant came running into me, and he said, "We got to get out of here. They're really blowing the bejesus out of Bien Hoa Air Force Base, which is probably no more than 8 clicks away." And you could see Spooky and Sparky. You're familiar with that terminology? And they were up there, and they were tracers just going everywhere. So I said, one spare round here, we are going to be in trouble. Crank them, let's go, we got to get out of here. So we came out, and I was right on the edge of Long Bend. So you can imagine Long Bend, and I was facing outside the base, but very close to where my battalion headquarters was located, but there was an auxiliary road. There's a blacktop road, and all my trucks were lined up on the auxiliary road. And just sitting there waiting for the MPs to pick me up. And there was a large explosion about 4:30 in the morning. And I thought, oh my heavens, it felt like a nuke, it was so large. And it rattled windows in Saigon, as I understand it. That was the beginning of the Tet Offensive for our area, because that was the message, evidently, that went to all the bad guys.
For the Marines stationed at Khe Sanh, the Tet Offensive began early when the North Vietnamese launched a massive military bombardment on January 21st. Enemy artillery dealt the Marines a devastating blow. They hit the magazine at Khe Sanh and destroyed 90% of the Marines' artillery and mortar rounds. American Marines endured a nightmarish 77-day siege under General Westmoreland's ordered Operation Pegasus and sent the Air Cavalry to begin their withdrawal. The Marine base at Khe Sanh permanently closed on July 5th.
It was a dry, dusty, dirty, it was, incoming a lot. Not a lot of soldiering to do at that point, other than in a defensive position. And then ultimately we withstood the attacks and were taken out of there.
Even though American forces turned the tide and won the battles associated with Tet, people back home grew cynical and support for the war soured. 1968 proved to be a year of disappointments and tragedies that added to the dismay surrounding Tet. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis on April 4th, leading to race riots in every American city. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in San Francisco on June 5th. The civil rights movement lost momentum after the Mexico Olympics when Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their hands in a Black Power salute. Meanwhile, disgruntled veterans who felt betrayed by their country joined the protest movement, and people at home watched the war in Vietnam play out on their television screens, convinced the U.S. had lost the war. Richard Nixon won the election for president and promised to end the war and guarantee peace with honor.
So I went back again. But the difference was the focus starting in spring of 1972 was going back to North Vietnam.
Now that being said, the Army never did lose an engagement over there. But we were fighting a people that were going to join that country together. And were willing to sacrifice anything to do it. And I think at that point we realized it was pretty deep water. I can't say enough about their soldiers. They were brutal, but they were good soldiers.
For me personally, it was a different war. We were going over North Vietnam, and a little tidbit, during May of 1972, the North Vietnamese shot more surface-to-air missiles, SA-2s, during that month than they had during the entire war up to that point. So it was not only intense on our side, but it was intense on their side.
When they returned home, it was not the throngs of people thanking them for their service or patriotic parades.
I always wanted to just get back to the world. Everybody said if I ever got back to the world, the rest of my life would just be gravy.
Well, I needed to take a cab from the airport to my home, and it's a long drive. From the airport to my house was almost an hour. And the whole time the cabbie told me what we were doing wrong in Vietnam, which was really helpful at that point. And then I just got home and I was with my family. Neighbors came over, and I found I had some issues. They were complaining about their lawns needing to be mowed or having too many weeds and all those mundane things, and I could hardly tolerate to be in a room with them. It took a while, and then after a while you just sublimate it like it didn't happen, because you can't deal with it. You can't deal with the people who have not seen it. You want to scream at them, and that doesn't make any sense, so you don't do anything. A lot of times, you get the sneer, weren't you smart enough to get out of it? And so you just eventually tiptoe around your experience. And until we started having reunions, I sublimated the whole thing. So that was almost 30 years of sublimation.
Then I walked down toward the bookstore, which was down toward the football stadium. And there were a lot of people dressed a lot different than I was, because I'd landed and I didn't have any civilian clothes. So I had a uniform, and that's what I wore. And I ran across a bunch of people who were against the war. By that time, so was I, but I knew why. I don't think they did. And they were, I mean, it was close to harassment. I don't know that it was, but it was a few derogatory things. That when I think back on it and remember it, that really hurt some. I don't know why, because I didn't know these people, and frankly, didn't give a damn what they thought. But somehow it did. And I guess because I knew people who were young and full of life who died.
I didn't want to tell anybody I'd been in the service. That's such a bad time. I came into Oakland, got a plane, flew to Dayton, Ohio, called my brother or dad, and the two of them walked in, and I was sitting in a bar reading the current Sports Illustrated and having a beer. And they said, "You ready to go? Let's go." No hugs, no handshakes, nothing from my brother or my father. And then I started my residency shortly after that. And it was just a bad time for the soldiers. It was just, I felt sorry for the guys nobody spit on me and nobody accosted me. Of course, I got there in the middle of the night, like at midnight when I landed in Oakland, so when they by there. But I thought that was such a disservice to those folks. Those boys over there, and I saw so many kids that got messed up so bad as a doc that it was really unfair. And I think that increased their PTSD and the problems with alcohol and drugs because of the lack of respect that those boys got, young men got.
The author Michael Hare wrote in his classic book about the conflict in Vietnam, Dispatches, about the difficulty of fitting back in when he returned home. It seemed now that everybody knew someone who had been in Vietnam and didn't want to talk about it. Maybe they didn't know how. And so it remains. How do you start that conversation about a conflict that remains cloaked in controversy? How do you revisit the ghost of another person's past? Perhaps more importantly, how do you show those veterans who remain the respect they've long deserved but have been denied for so long? Vietnam, Vietnam, Vietnam. Let the healing finally begin.
I would hope that people who see these old guys as veterans' hats, especially the Vietnam era, understand what they may have seen. And it was a bad war. Maybe it shouldn't have been a war at all. But you have to love the warrior because they gave it all. They really did. And even later on in the war, when things seemed to be falling apart and there were a lot more drugs, I think the basic soldier was still a basic soldier.
No, I can't think of anything else that, other than I just really want to emphasize that I was not a hero in any stretch of the imagination. I just had a job, and as I said earlier, I am so pleased that I had all the soldiers that I was responsible for, and I did not have to write a letter home to anyone, and that's, if there's an accomplishment that I had, even though we had IEDs and all kinds of them, one of the things that I'm very happy about.
To anyone out there that hears this, remember the people, men and women, who go to war. Many times, it's certainly not their decision, and clearly most times it's not their decision where they go, in what area they serve, what they do. Those orders come down from above. But remember, because a part of our country is to have a military, and I do believe a strong military is really important. It ought to be judiciously used, however, and the men and women who take those orders and go do what they must do. You can't have a war where people don't lose lives, where families aren't torn apart by death or destruction or physical or mental injuries. It's a heavy price to pay. So the political goal ought to be absolutely and damn sure worth it. That's all.
If we're going to fight communism, why don't we invade Cuba? That way we can come home on the weekends. It's just 90 miles away. It's not 12,000 miles away. If you want a war, Cuba would be much more convenient.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.